Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Maryland Apex Accelerator webinar today. Glad you could join us. I'm your host, Yasmin Razak, and I'm the Marketing and Training Coordinator here. The topic today is Price Modeling 101, and it is led by Tyrese Johnson, who is the president of the Greenlight Group. We will start shortly, and there will be opportunities for you to ask Tyrese your questions by typing them in the chat box on your screen. We will pause for Q&A throughout the next hour. As always, this has been recorded, and a copy of the slides will be sent to you after the webinar. For those of you not familiar with the Maryland Apex Accelerator, it's our mission to help Maryland businesses to compete in federal, state, and local government procurement processes. Our services are no cost to you. So if you would like to speak to a counselor, please make sure you're registered on our website, marylandapex.org, so that we can assist you. Okay, well, that's enough for me. Over to you, Tyrese.
Great. Thanks, Yasmin. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tyrese Johnson, president of the Greenlight Group. A little bit about me, my background. You flip the slides for me. A little bit about me. Spent 25 years worked for Department of Defense, Army headquarters. Half that time I spent Department of Homeland Security. Within the CFO's organization. My educational background is economics, bachelor's and master's, and I primarily function as a technical advisor at the GS-15 level in Homeland Security, estimating some of the major weapon systems, platforms, IT systems, as well as cleared systems in various site installation activities. And so moved on into the private industry and started a company doing a lot of cost and economic analysis for small businesses, as well as supporting as a subcontractor for smaller businesses, supporting government clients who need financial management support, economic analysis, cost and price analysis. And so what I wanted to do was, by way of the Apex programs, is introduce the topic of pricing. As a small business owner and having background in DoD, Homeland Security, one of the things that we've seen quite often with our small business counterparts was price analysis, and we would often not move forward with smaller businesses because when we're doing analysis against our independent government cost estimates, we were recognizing that the small businesses weren't adequately pricing. And so when I came on this side of the house, I thought, how about I create a project or training module that will allow folks to at least become somewhat insightful of not only how to do it, but how we do it. And then as a business service that we offer, we do help small businesses identify their revenue generating strategies, identify what they're currently doing, sometimes do assessments on what they're currently doing, and make recommendations for improvement. Additionally, we also help some of the mid to larger companies develop their pricing packages for larger proposals that they're supporting. And so next slide, please. So this is the agenda, just, what is the pricing model? Learn how to structure and present the cost effectively. What are some of the common mistakes? For all of the small business owners in the GovCon space, FAR 15.404 is specifically speaking to what will contracting officers ask you? What will they expect from you when you're bidding on projects? And if you do not have the ability to defend those things and answer those questions accordingly, you will obviously be denied an opportunity with the federal government. This is very common from my experience in this is very common from my experience on the federal government side. Common direct rates, indirect rates, fees. I'm gonna offer you a real life example toward the middle of the presentation, and what I want to do there is really highlight why this is important. I had one particular client. She had a set of rates that she was using and really didn't have ground rules and assumptions associated with those rates she was using. And she was up for a recompete as a sub, and they were comparing her rates against the others. And so she came to me and I was able to help her look at her rates the way the prime contractor would evaluate her rates against the other subs who were competing for that work. And it's just a snapshot to offer kind of a visual example of what the thought process is that goes into that. We can go to the next slide, and after the model, it'll kind of be a repeat of things that we've talked about in process. For timing purposes, I want to try to finish up around the 45 mark to keep some time on the back end to answer questions. We can go to the very next slide. Thank you. And so I'll start here, right? So what is price modeling? Can I get in the chat real quick before I start speaking? Because what I'd like to do is get a sense of who's who and how much time has folks spent in the space. So if you've been in the GovCon space more than 5 years, can you type a 1 in the chat? That's three out of 18 or 3 out of 16. So that's a small number. So you guys, you three that at least you three that participated, um, you're gonna get this because if you didn't get it at the onset, by the time you hit your 5 year mark in GovCon space, you kind of know what this is, and so you would have had some experience with it. So I'll kind of speak more of an intermediate level to the folks who didn't put a 1 in the chat. So when you're competing for a government contract or even offering a service, right? What is your revenue generation engine? And you have to ask yourself that question. How do I know how much revenue to generate when I'm offering a service? Some people just say a salary, right? And that's typically correct. But that's also a typical mistake that folks make because when we come out of being employees, the only rates we typically know is our salary. But when you're a business owner and you're selling your service, right, you're selling your expertise to a federal, state, or local client, that is not the rate that you charge. And so oftentimes, when I'm working with small business owners, I'll see salary plus a little bit of expenses. And they'll say, well, this is what I bill to the client. And so in the chat, what I just dropped in there is salary plus wrap rate plus fully burdened costs plus fee is your billable rate, is what you bill the client. And we'll get into that. And so what you see on the screen is simply an example, right? If we're looking at IT support services, system engineer is a category, it's a senior level person, the number of hours they intend to work per year for our calculations, it's 2080, our rate is 170, and then direct costs and fees, your total corporate billing rate your total revenue you should receive for that one particular labor category would be the 586 range. And then we'll step through on how we get there. And so next slide, please. So why does it matter, right? So, excuse me, specifically if you work with federal, state, or any local municipalities, they are required to ensure that the labor rates you're charging them are reasonable, right? And oftentimes when you're reading RFPs for state and localities, they're asking you specifically to give me the labor categories or the labor categories and labor rates for these 3 individuals that you're bidding, right? And what they do is they compare it in their database. They're going to take a look at if you have a project analyst and that analyst is $200, they're going to look in their database for work that they've awarded that had a similar labor category with experience. And they're going to immediately be able to identify whether you're overpricing or underpricing, right? If you're within range is acceptable, but if you're way out of range, it gives them indicators on do you really understand what it takes to do the work you're bidding on. And so why is it important? It defines your value, right? Your pricing reflects your market position, your service quality, your credibility, right? Do you know what you're bidding on? Is the ultimate question that the government is going to be asking themselves about you when they're reading a narrative about the work you can do and comparing that narrative to the price that you're recommending the government pays for. It protects your profit. No one in business is, unless you're a nonprofit, you're in it to make profit, right? And so by properly structuring your pricing for the service offerings, you ensure that you earn a certain profit amount, which obviously would be predetermined by you and your counterparts in your business. But you want to protect that, right? The last thing you want to do is pay everybody else and have very little on the back end, right? For yourself, because that's why you're in business, to provide excellent service, but also to acquire profit on the end of that excellent service that you provide. Supports compliance. This is a repeat, FAR 15404. Be familiar with it. You don't have to be an expert in it because no one ever quizzes you on it, but be familiar with how the government will ask you a set of questions around how you do your pricing model when you get to the negotiation table with them. It builds trust, right? If I have clients and I'm looking at their rates and their rates are all over the place relative to industry standards, can I trust that they know what they're doing? In terms of how to run a business, right? Because if you have high risk in running your business, I can assume you're going to be high risk at delivering the solution as well, right? And then if you want to grow, right? If you want to grow, it's a clear indicator for your ability to scale. If you have consistent rates that have standardized ground rules and assumptions, it'll position you to quickly scale, right? And oftentimes the difficulty in small businesses is that we aren't great at everything. So we have to figure out the things we are great at. But then when the opportunity presents itself to scale, do our systems that we have in place align with our ability to quickly scale? And that's something we have to think about, be mindful of, and have some rules on which we can follow, right? And then it just allows you to compete smarter, right? You've done the research you needed to do, you got it, right? I'm gonna just throw a question in here just for thought as we transition to the next slide. If the contract officer asks you to justify your labor rates right now, today, from where you guys currently stand as business owners, what would you show them? What documentation would you show them? Just kind of think about that, right? Pricing models is not just a math problem. It's a strategic tool, right? It's your revenue engine, right? And you need to be able to defend your revenue engine. Next slide, please. So what are some common mistakes, right? Failure to align price strategy with the proposal narrative. So for example, I'm doing some economic development RFP responses for different cities in the US on the East Coast. And what they're asking for is market research around, and I'll give you the example. I'm doing an economic analysis response to Martin Airport. For those of you who live in the DMV area, Martin Airport is northeast Baltimore. It's a small regional airport, right? But they want to grow, and the competition for them is BWI. So the comparative analysis that I'm writing up is, what are small to medium regional airports throughout the country, and what are their revenue generators, right? And how do they project their revenue long term, right? What's the volume of people that's coming in and out of those regional airports? What's the number of what's the number of flights per day, right? And so traffic indicates and is a key variable in revenue projection for regional airport. And so I'm responding to the analysis thereof, right? If I charge $50 an hour as a senior level economist and with 2 support analysts, how realistic are they going to take me, right? And so when you have something that complex, you do need 1 or 2 senior economists. You're going to need a project analyst to write everything up for you as the economists do the data analytics. right, and provide that information to the project analyst to kind of do the writing and packaging of it. But if we only charging $50 an hour, we failed. We failed our price strategy to meet our proposal narrative. And so that's a common mistake that folks make. They may charge $50 an hour doing a training, but when you're doing, as an economist, I can do training for $50 an hour. But if I'm doing economic analysis on a regional airport and I have to compare minimum 25 airports across the country, similar size and scope, and passenger traffic, that's much more of a complexity in terms of the skill set needed to perform the work. So always think about that. The others are pretty straightforward, but I wanted to give you a narrative on the first one. Every rate you charge for your service isn't equal to the results or the requirements that the client lays out. And you really have to think that through. Okay. Next slide, please. And this is the FAR. So understanding the FAR, right? 15404. Proposal analysis. This section is dedicated to everyone, every small business who is responding to government RFPs. Excuse me. It is clearly telling you price reasonableness, right? So just give me a one if you work for the federal government at any time or state government and work specifically with contracting officers or CORs, contract office representatives, or even the analysts that are doing the independent government cost estimates. That'll give me an indicator on how deep to go here. So I have two. Okay. So what happens is price reasonableness comes from independent government cost estimate, and IGCE, right? And if you're a contractor for the Fed, that's two. I mean, that's appropriate because you would understand this language. So independent government cost estimate, those happen on every project in the federal government. I can't say the same for state and local counties, things of that nature, but absolutely in the federal government, if a contract is being put out into RFP status, right? There's an independent government cost estimate. And if you're not experienced with the federal government, you may not realize that they've already prepared an estimated cost associated with the requirement. And so they're comparing whatever the vendors are submitting against their independent government cost estimate. Now, is their independent government cost estimate 100% correct? No. They are going into the federal database. You know, the analyst may not be as experienced who's putting it together. There's all types of variables that go into place. However, that still said, they're going to compare, you know, if you got 10 vendors that respond, I got 10 estimates to compare against the IGCE. And what happens is the vendors' estimates or proposed estimates for the work that they want to support, 2 or 3 of them are going to kind of meet somewhere in the middle. They're going to be very close to one another. And that'll give the government an indication of, okay, these folks seem to understand the requirement similarly. And then the other 7 will be all over the place. And what you do immediately is you get rid of the other 7. And then you start looking for solutions. You know, who's best solutioning where the prices are more aligned with the government's independent cost estimate. And so that's critical to have awareness of, that every estimate you're putting forth to the federal government, they've already had one that they are anticipating the price to fall within this range. And they may have a 15% plus or minus variance attached to it. You don't know that. You don't know what their variance is going to be, but there will always be a variance attached to it. And so that's probably the most important piece here on this slide, and understanding the FAR and understanding that language and what does it mean for the services that you offer. You can find, and the references are here, so I would ask that you copy them before we move to the next slide so you'll have them with you. I'll just pause a second. So while I pause, any questions, any curiosities before I proceed? Okay, seeing none. Next slide, please. So what are common direct rate types, right? Excuse me. Direct rates is typically associated with your labor, so your employee or yourself, right? And all of the costs and materials directly related to that project, right? So think about it. I'm hiring myself out to a state, federal government, or client. My direct cost is my labor, all the materials I need. If there's any specific software that the client is specifically asking me for, that is considered direct cost. Right? Excuse me. That's considered direct cost. Do I typically travel to Kentucky, to Lexington, Kentucky, to do business? The answer is no. Right. So all my travel costs, and if I need to ship anything over there, um, my hotel stays, rental car, all of that will become direct costs to the client if it's not something I have to do on a daily basis. And so on to your right of the screen, you'll see some examples of what direct costs are, right? Labor, taxes, insurance, your PTO, right? Um, anything specific, and I foot stomp that again, anything specific to the client is a direct cost, right? Because you're in business, you're not assuming any of those costs that you will only incur when you're working with the client. Um, and I mentioned travel, I mentioned software, um, and this can be a range of things when you look at what's direct, right? For those who may be in the construction industry, for example, you may have certain construction type vehicles, but if a client wants a certain type of wall built, connected to its foundation, that becomes a unique cost, right? A direct cost to that client because your other clients don't typically do that sort of wall construction. So I'm just going to pop something here. Oh, it didn't go. And so I put this in here, right? Because I want you to hold on to this. CFOs should be able to align these types of cost elements to the company's financial statement and income and balance sheet. So, and this is important, right? Because if you're ever audited as a business, you're going to have to show me all your direct costs. And then the next slide, we're going to touch indirect costs, but show me all your indirect costs. Because if you don't know what these things are and you're doing business, you can't come up with a billable rate. And that's ultimately where we're going. So next slide, please. So what are indirect rates, right? These things clearly represent expenses that you have as a business owner. All right. So think about the expenses you have as a business owner, whether you have paying clients or not. You started your business, you in year one, and now you're doing your taxes and your accountant wants the financial statement, right? We know what revenue is, right? We hit the revenue filter and we can see how much revenue we've brought in. But there are many different categories that we have to place our indirect cost in, right? Because we need to know what we're spending on what by category. And that's what the federal government wants to know from a business perspective. And so you have to ask yourself, okay, what am I spending to run the business? And what does that look like in comparison to my revenue? And so these categories are pivotal. And how do you get to, again, your billable rate is where we're going. You have to know what your indirect costs are. So if you have office space, you have HR support, you have legal services a few times a year. You may have some travel expenses, marketing expenses, IT support. All of us, I would assume many of us, not all of us, but many of us may use Microsoft products. And so if you're using Outlook and Teams and Zoom, right? All of those things we have to use every day, just to do business and communicate, right? And work on briefings and presentations and Excel sheets and things of that nature. That's just, par for the course. We need those types of software tools to do business. But some clients will require us to have something unique. And if they require us to have a unique software, that's going to be a direct rate that we would bill to the client. But outside of that, marketing, going to conferences, right? If you go into conferences, if you're in the DMV area, you know that it's something going on every day of the week around GovCon, GovJam, GovLive, all sorts of events going on nonstop. Those are indirect costs because you're marketing your business in those spaces. Throughout the year, you may have employees that need training, right? Not specific to a client, but they just need training. They just need upskilling, right? Those are going to be indirect costs that you have because you just have them, right? Obviously, your accounting is going to be those type of indirect costs that you're going to have anyway. Every year, you're going to do taxes. Every month, you're going to do bookkeeping, monthly reconciliations. And so these are all indirect costs if you're not doing them yourself and you have to pay someone to do them on behalf of your business. I had a question here. I'll just ask it out loud and I'm just throw an answer out there. What would your business look like if your indirect rates were calculated and not guessed instead of guessed? Because I've had clients and I ask this this way. I've had clients where, and just a word or two, just type it in if you don't mind, if you got a response to it. But I've had clients where I would ask them, what are your indirect rates? And I would have these cost elements in front of them and they wouldn't give me a fraction of them. And I knew what was missing. And that told me that they wasn't aware on the level of indirect costs you have in a business that you may not even be classifying as indirect, right? Okay. Next slide, please. So when you're working in the government, right? When you're working with the government does allow you to capture a fee for doing business. What happens often is folks will improperly calculate their rate. And when they finally get through all of the expenses, the indirect costs, the fee is not what the fee they thought it was going to be. Right? And so what we have to do when we're looking at fee is after we fully understand what our billing rate is, what our direct and our indirect costs around that billing rate, which is, I think someone mentioned it earlier, it comprises and becomes your wrap rate. Then you put your fee on top of that, right? And then from there, you determine what your billing rate is going to be to the client, what you are going to bill to the client. And that's pivotal, right? If you don't bill an appropriate rate to the client, you go out of business or you go into the negative, and it's on you because many government agencies will not renegotiate. And so you have two terms here, fee and margin. And for me over the years, I've heard people mistakenly use them as the same thing. But margin is how much money you actually keep after your revenue is earned. So you think about you got your rates, you're selling your rates, you're earning revenue based on those rates, but then you run through all your indirect costs, the costs that you need to operate your business, and you compare the difference. How much dollars do I have remaining versus what did it cost to pay salaries and run the business during that same time period? Let's call that time period 1 year, right? And so your margin can be 5%, 1%, 10%. And it's all based on how you've properly estimated your labor rates that you would bill to the government or bill to whatever client you have. And so, and oftentimes in industry that, you'll hear companies say, we shoot for an 8% margin or we shoot for a 10% margin, right? And that is literally how much revenue is left after all of the expenses are paid, right? And that's simply a percentage. Can we go to the next slide, please? So let's get into the example. So any questions on the concepts that I led up to this point? The next two slides may take a few minutes because I'll walk through it slow. Okay, seeing it, I'll start out. So there's two ways. One particular client that I had, and I mentioned this earlier, there are two ways to do estimates, right? Price analysis. That doesn't mean both ways are correct, but I've seen them done different ways. And so the client that I had earlier this year, what she did, she had a systems engineer, and she said, if I paid a system engineer 190,000, what rate do I bill? And I was like, okay, that's how you do it. She said, yeah, I do it this way all the time. So, all right. I said, so how do you determine your indirect? I mean, your fringe, right? Your fringe is associated with that labor rate, right? So if 190K is the person's salary, you also have to pay for 401K. You got fees, right? If you're a business owner and you've ever registered for a 401K account for your employees, there's fees. So you're gonna match, let's just say 6%, then you're paying fees to have that 401K account. You're paying fees for the healthcare, dental, vision, right? Plus your portion of what you're paying for the employee. Then you have payroll taxes, right? Because every state and county want their cut. And then you have to put money in there just in case person needs to get training, you know. And then you have your general administration overhead costs, right? And those tend to be percentages, which those tend to be percentages. And the data inputs or the variables that go into creating these numbers are hitting because I didn't want to get too detailed with it. Just wanted to give you guys a snapshot. And so in blue, what you're going to get is a total cost, which is direct plus indirect, right? And that's a number, right? So with the client that I had, the first thing they didn't have is they didn't have the 401k through training. They never calculated that. They had salary plus G&A plus overhead, right? Plus a fee percentage. And so the first thing I had to do was have them go through their books with their accounting and get the percentages of the 401k through healthcare, dental, payroll, training. I had to have them go into their records and get all of that first and get percentages so we can build those percentages appropriately. And so we came up with about 406 based on her approach, even getting the percentages, right? So she was like, okay, so I can charge 126 an hour for somebody I'm paying 190K. And I smiled and said, not quite. I said, this is literally what you need to bring in order to break even. 126 an hour will allow you to break even if you're paying somebody 190K. And she was surprised. Let's go to the next slide, please. So we did the analysis for her behind the scenes and told her bare minimum, she would need to pay 170, right? And so we redid the analysis, and again, I truncated the table just for presentation purposes. Bare minimum, she would need to pay 170 for a person that she's offering a salary of 190, because that's going to get her upwards of 600K for that individual, right? And I would honestly say that this 170 was still low, but small business, not a lot of bandwidth. So a company like Raytheon or something like that can charge 275 and get it. But her being a small business as a sub, even if the prime is getting the 275, she wouldn't be able to get the 275 because the prime is going to take their cut. And in this particular example, we were going in as a sub, so we understood that the prime is going to take a cut of the true number, right? Which would have been in the 250 to 275 range. So we were able to help her understand, okay, now so the real difference is, and I'll slow down, the real difference that she will be looking at is from 126 to 170 is where she has room to earn revenue for her business and potentially profit. That's the space she want to be in, right? She wind up taking our notes, the ground rules, assumptions, and everything else that we use to build into it. And for these categories, she actually got And then she got much more for each of these labor categories because she was able to defend it to the prime. And also the prime was charging at this level, the prime was charging between 250 and 275. So for her asking 170 and being able to defend it, they actually gave her more. Okay. And they still probably got 75 to $100 on that rate. And it's simply a pass through to the sub on an hourly basis. So we think about that. They still earn roughly, 100 times two, right? 200K on that rate. So let's go to the next slide, please, just to show the variance. And so here you see the variance, right? So if she did based on her salary-based model, right, you see the risk of underpricing was extremely high and alignment to the wrap rate, right, or with the wrap rate was inconsistent. But when you go fully burdened, right, you're able to show the process that you took in order to develop the labor rates, right? And then you can fully see what you're going to earn on each labor category so that if you have any risk or uncertainty, it can be quickly identified, right? And then the most important piece is that if the government or your prime contractor that you're working with says, well, where did you get these rates from? I need you to defend them. I need you to walk me through how you came up with these rates. You're confident, right? You're confident. I saw a note earlier about the rates, and someone said, my invoice. Well, that's what you built, but how did you come up to, what was your ground rules and methodology to help you determine what to bill? And that's the answers that contract officers is going to ask for when they have a conversation with you about price reasonableness. That's what a prime contractor is going to ask you when they talk about what's your rate to be my subcontractor. Because one, they want it to be defensible should the government ask them. And then two, they want to make sure that they can earn enough profit on subbing the workout, right? If they can't earn enough profit on subbing the workout, it may not be worth it to them. So they won't sub the workout. And so there's always a need, and it will always be a requirement at some point. If it hasn't happened yet for some, at some point there will be a requirement for you to defend your rates. And so if you look at below, underneath the arrow in the yellow, it's taking you to the yellow box. The client I had, this is what she was proposing, right? 434 using based on the salary. The problem is if she entered a lower salary in the equation, the total amount lowered, right? But what happens in year two when an employee wants a salary increase, but you've only priced out year one salary, right? And if you need to, for higher positions, obviously, right, if you're paying someone 190 as a salary, well, chances are, a 2% raise is not going to be a drop in the bucket for them. So you're going to have to give them a raise of 15 to 20K. Well, you didn't account for that because your pricing model was based on the person's salary. So that only supports you in year one, right? Where when we look at the one to the right, the total corporate proposed rate, this is my rate, period. So at the 170 per hour, at the 170K $170 per hour, that's my rate, period. And then I can negotiate salary increases and things of that nature with my employees year 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and still have enough space, right? And then simply request inflation on top of my rate from the client, which is acceptable. But you'll never go in the hole because inflation, you may only get 2 to 5% inflation increase. But if you got to pay the salary increase of around 15%, well, and then someone just put a note, the negative reflects the profit, I assume. Correct. That is correct. And so when we get to the negatives, it's simply, this is what she would have lost. If she don't increase her rates, but if she don't increase the property rate, let me slow down, I'm thinking too fast. If she doesn't have standardized ground rules and assumptions for each labor rate across the labor categories, this is what you lose. Circle in red. Now, because we did this analysis with our client, and she got more than what we had projected for her. It was an instant. She didn't have to do more work. There was nothing additional required to her. She simply justified her labor rates. And you can see instantly, if you add this up, 150 and 150 is 3, plus another 150 is 450. You're talking about a 500K increase by simply having a methodology, the ground rules, assumptions that you can defend to your prime contractor or the government client. And the fee that she paid us, she was like, oh, that's nothing. No, because this isn't savings. This is your revenue generation. And I remember our initial conversations with her. She thought I was always referring to savings. And I said, no, this is revenue generation. When you thoroughly prepare your pricing model and you submit it and it's accepted, that's revenue generation. And so she got a $500,000 increase for 4 labor categories. Excuse me. Can we go to the next slide?
Yes, Tyrese, we do have a question.
Yes,
Um,
I'll take it.
and it says, for a really small startup in the GovCon space, what percentage do you advise for the fee? And what should the fee I should pay the talent? Oh, sorry. The other part of the question is, what fee should I pay the talent acquisition firm if I don't have that capability in-house?
So if let me interpret talent acquisition firm, are you referring to, can you type it in the box? It'll be easier. Talent acquisition firm, are you referring to a recruiter who finds people for you and then you pay the recruiter whatever fee that they request for that full-time
You said
employee?
yes. Yes.
That's the answer. Okay. So they tend to have high fees, and that's just what they are, right? They tend to be 25 to 35%. I've used them in the beginning, um, and I built a network after that, that now I can just reach out to somebody within my network and say, hey, I need help over here. Do you guys know anybody? I do it that way now because now I have a network. But when I first did it, you typically fall victim to the percentages that they charge. They're going to charge a percentage on the salary that you offer. So if you offer 100K for simplicity, they're going to charge you 30,000 for that full-time equivalent. You have to have that built into your pricing model. If you don't, well, you're starting out 30,000 in the hole. Did I answer your question? Or was it two-part? Just want to be clear.
And said yes.
Okay. Okay. So we can go to the next slide. And so just four P's of a winning strategy, right? This is about pricing strategy, revenue generation strategy. If you're in business, you want to generate revenue. New businesses, the earlier you think this way, the better position you, the better you position yourself, right? Um, can't go without saying it. Um, because this was my background, economics, cost analysis, price analysis, operations research, it was second nature for me to think about this. But if you come out of IT, you come out of HR, you come out of so many different um, disciplines and career fields, it may not be second nature for you to think this way. Get help. Don't try to figure it out yourself because time is money. And the price that you would pay for this type of support is inconsequential. If you look at the previous example, you're talking, I think it was an 8 hours worth of work with that particular client. And instantly when we were done and helped her present to the government, it was a 500K increase because her labor rates were so low when we started. And the client had worked with her for like 3 or 4 years. They didn't tell her they were low. And she was working really hard and doing good work. But when she said, hey, I need to renegotiate my rates, they said, okay, let's have a conversation. And then when we helped her present it, they was like, all right, we accept. And by the way, the government gave us an increase in this one, so we'll transfer that increase to you. because they had a good relationship. But she came prepared, and the prime saw that. And so here, price transparency breakdown. How did you do it? Show your math, right? Proof. What are your backups? What sources did you use, right? Are you just coming out of your pocket? Or I know somebody else in business that does project support and they use $82 an hour, so I'm gonna go 87. Like that doesn't work, so you want to have these things in mind, and then in terms of competitive edge, right? If I got a 10-year, if I'm proposing project analysts with 10 years experience at 104 $115 an hour, and you're proposing the same position at 90, you're gonna get X'd because it's just not realistic, right? Lots of people out in the corporate space, lots of education, they've invested in themselves, training, certifications, you name it. Um, they're going to want a return on that investment. And so you can justify it as a business owner. You just have to make sure you present it in such a way. And then all proposals, make sure your pricing is clean, FAR compliant, so that the evaluators, the contract officers, and the folks on their team can clearly see how you came about your cost model. And then if they still have questions, which typically they'll still ask questions about it, they can ask you questions. The example that I shared today may seem small, but there are many contracts with 50 to 100 FTEs on them, and you have to have a system in place because should an opportunity come, so say, hey, we got 20 FTEs for you, it may take you a month on your own to come up with the analysis to defend it, right? So the sooner you learn how to do this, you just simply plus one, plus two, plus three, you start scaling, right? Again, my example is showing four, but there are large businesses that are doing 100, 200, 300 FTEs, and they have a team of folks who just do this type of work for them. But as small business owners, we have to do this and all of the other things, right? I'll pause. I've seen a few contracts. Here's a question. I've seen a few contracts where the allotted time amount has almost break even in terms of execution and profit in cases like that. Can they say this out loud so I can be clear on what's being asked?
Yeah, sure. I will allow everyone to be able to unmute themselves.
Okay. Mark, I see your question. Can you say it out loud so I can hear the question?
You should be able to unmute yourself, Mark. Try again.
Okay, can you hear me? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, thank you. I should have wrote that question a little bit more clearly. So I've seen a few contracts get put out where when you take into consideration the cost of labor, the indirect cost, the overheads, that the salary that you would realistically pay a person based on, let's say, for example, the DMV, where the profit you derived from bidding on that contract, it's not really worth it. Like, is it just worth the squeeze? So, in cases like that, what would be the ideal approach?
Tyrese, I think you're still muted.
I'm sorry, I got muted too. Okay. Did in that example you gave, Mark, did you win the work or you proposed the work? You were still in the proposal process.
It's still in the proposal process. So what happened was that just quick numbers. The contract was for 170 over 3 years,
Mhm.
and it was here in the DMV. It was for two individuals, and when you do look at the cost of living based on what they were potentially offering, you're asking yourself like where do I squeeze in the profit margin for a contract like this?
So I so 170K is my
170
assumption for two
over three
individuals.
years for two individuals over 3 years. That's almost unrealistic.
I would ask you what type of work is it?
It was simple front desk work. It was no specific skills required. You were just pretty much a pulse.
admin support,
Admin
right?
support, correct.
So I'm going to admin support, 2 FTEs, 2 full-time equivalents, or part-time is option.
It was part-time work. They just needed to be man the station for 12 hours.
Okay, so part-time work, I can show you, I would have been able to show you how to make it work because realistically, admin support, and let's just say entry-level admin support, $25 an hour, right?
Okay.
And I would start there, right? And if everyone is patient, I would go to a calculator and go 170K divided by 2080. And this is simple. This is not, right? So 170K,
They provided all the tools. They just needed a person to
got you.
two individuals part-time just to fill a 12 hour space work window.
Right. So I'm looking at 25 an hour times two, right? On the high side would be 50 an hour, right? On the high side. And we're talking part-time.
Yes.
And what I would have done is I would have negotiated with the two admin support persons and negotiated how many hours per week they can work. And I would have did the math so that between the two, they were working 50 hours per week because it's part-time work. One can do 30, one can do 20. I mean, however they want it, right? Whatever made
Hmm.
sense to them as admin support. And so I know I'm paying 50 hours a week for two people, and then I do the math all the way through off of the 170K. And I guarantee you can make profit on that. Good profit on that. I just did the math. So
Okay.
so these are the types of people like myself that you need to help talk you through because I'm sure you did the proposal, you did all of the stuff you needed to do from your level of expertise, but then there's other folks like myself who support CEOs, who support executives, as a technical advisor and is running through these scenarios for 100 FTEs, right? Because the government has to make sure we put we on the government side we have to make sure that we put a budget in place, right? That's reasonable and realistic. And then we also have a good understanding of the risk parameters against that budget so that that work can be executed and that product can be delivered to the user community. Now that I'm a business owner, a lot of that thinking is second nature to me, right? It's just a matter of growing, right? Because I'm a few years in. So it's just a matter of growing and scaling, based on opportunities that we receive. And so in that case, I would have walked you through strategy, right? Because on the surface, if you hired two people full time, no, I would say no. But if it's admin support, somebody just sitting there saying hello and smiling, I would help you put a strategy in place to make it so that you can get the past performance and the revenue and take something away, right? Take away good margin against your expenses. We had 59. Hope I answered your question, Mark, and I hope I offered clarity for everyone else listening to Mark's question.
Yes. Thank
Um,
you.
Yes,
for a
and I
really
can
small,
always forward questions to
okay,
Tyrese after the webinar because we are running out of time.
okay, and so you can just go to the last slide because we hit a lot of the red flags, which is the following slide. We hit that already in a conversation, kind of answered it with Mark. Key takeaways, don't use structured templates. If you know somebody who did it before and they use this template, don't do that. Every business is unique, even if it sounds similar. Make sure you understand your numbers and make sure you have revenue strategy, to support your numbers. Based on Mark's question, all you needed was a conversation with somebody who understands economics and who can offer you a strategy against those types of scenarios. And then just kind of a call to action, how you get in touch with me is the very last slide, saying thank you. And then I'm gonna put this in the box, which I have. If you have questions for me, you can just hit it on my site and I'll answer your questions directly. It'll be easy to get to me. And Helena, I just put it in there. So if you hit that link, you should get to my contact and just type it in. I'm trying to scan real quick. For a really small startup, GovCon space, what percentage do you advise for fee? So don't worry about your fee, worry about your price. Worry about this. The first step is what service do you offer and to whom are you offering it? So if you IT help desk support tier one, for example, in the federal space, there's a rate or slash range associated with that labor category, for someone up to 5 years experience, as an example. And then you build your rates up from there. If you build your rates up properly, you will always make profit in your rate structure. The fee is based on risk. How risky is it for you to hire someone with less than 5 years experience who was going to be help desk tier one? How risky is it? Think of fee as risk. It's not that risky, 5 to 7%. If you need to hire somebody tier three support, 15 plus years experience in the counterintelligence space, how risky is that? Probably your fee is going to be 15 to 25%. So look at fee as a product of risk. I hope that answers your question, Yuda. That answer your question there. What resources do you use to get salary survey data? None. When we talk about price analysis, we're talking about building up your pricing. What you're pricing your service, not salaries. What you're pricing your services, right? That's the key ingredient for you. When you get to salaries, well, you can go to anything and find salaries. Some of the websites. I'm not a. I don't have a favorite website to go to for salaries. I think you can go Indeed and quite a few others. But for me, it's based on what you offer, right? And the price of the service you offer. And that's your first step, right? You want to research companies who offer services you offer to similar clients that you market toward. That's your starting point, not salary. Okay. And so, Gustavo, hope that answers you. Ronnie, you're welcome. Helena, I put the link in there. And then Yasmin, you put your link in there. Any more questions for anyone?
No, it doesn't look like there are any more. Thank
Good.
you so
Okay.
much, Tyrese, for a great
Thank you.
presentation. And thank you, everybody, for participating today. As always, I will be sharing the recording and the slides within the hour. And obviously, you can see Tyrese's contact information if you would like to follow up with him. And of course, we always encourage you to speak to your Apex counselor as well. So thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining today, and we'll see you at another event. Bye-bye.
Thank you again. Take care.